In this video, I'm going to provide you with 10 ideas to help you to qualify your own answers. The first thing I'd like to talk about here, the first filter, if you want, would be to ask yourself, is this interesting? So is your story interesting? And what I mean by this is that it's oftentimes that your answers could benefit from a bit of dramatization, maybe, or essentially the goal in job interview is to differentiate yourself from other candidates. So is your answer something interesting for the person you will be interviewing with? So you could qualify it from multiple directions if you want, whether you could dramatize it or whether you have some other elements to make it more interesting, but this would be the first filter to talk about here. The second idea for you to help you to qualify your answers for the purpose of a job interview would be clarity. So is it clear, right? Because what happens here is I would say actually the vast majority of answers in job interviews lack clarity of thought. And this could happen for many reasons. Either your answer is too long, either it's a bit ambiguous in the way you communicate it. Some interesting ideas here would be here to maybe focus on the right keywords that would help your interviewer to easily understand your story, and also to keep in mind the type of person you're interviewing with, right? So if you're a technical person interviewing with a non-technical person, that you should maybe tune up your answer as such to make it more compelling for a non-technical audience, and vice versa. If you're talking to a technical audience, then still, you could probably improve it, but on the other side, on the technical stuff, by, I don't know, mentioning a few keywords or a few numbers there, right? So clarity would be the second. The third element that I helped would improve many of candidates' answers for the purpose of job interviews would be to mention when it happened, where it happened, and what was your role. So in my experience, around 85% of answers in job interviews lack context, right? So when, where, your role, right, in the situation, if you would like to structure in the STAR format. This is number 3. Number 4, could your answer benefit from a bit of positivity? Okay, so to give you a counterexample here, some of you would talk about failure in a job interview even if you're not asked for a failure question, right? So this would be the extreme example, and you'd never do this unless you have some amazing learnings, which very few people can focus on selling themselves on their learnings unless asked for a failure story. But long story short here, you should check your answer for signs of negativity and try to make your answer overall more positive. Positivity sells in job interviews in particular as well. Number 5, does it contain quantifiable information, such as metrics? Here what I would recommend is to focus on one key metric here, because what happens if you don't have to use a ton of numbers or a ton of quantifiable information if they don't really matter. So focus on what actually matters, but try to make it quantifiable, right? So this would be my advice here, because quantifying, as with context in the previous one, would help to significantly improve the quality of your answers as well. Number 6, does it contain any learnings? Right, so the traditional advice is to only talk about learnings if you're talking about a non-positive or failure story, But even further, if you're talking about a positive experience, I think it still makes sense to talk about learnings, right? So in many cases, immediately after talking about the results, if you want to structure in the STAR format, some learnings could be something interesting for you to consider for your own answers, in a bid, of course, to improve its quality, and of course the extent you have some learnings in that occasion. Number 7, the length of your answer, and this goes together with the depth of your answer. So what happens here is that in some places you're being recommended to have answers of 2 minutes or less, or in other places you're recommended to go with longer type of answers. Now what I would recommend is for you to use these as exercises. So for example, if you have a story that's 2 pages, then you would of course want to take it as an exercise to say it in 2 minutes for the purpose of improving in things such as clarity of thought. However, by no means you should take this as strict advice for a job interview that your answer should be no longer than 2 minutes. I believe that's the wrong approach. Similarly, actually, I found that over time, longer, convincing first answers tend to do significantly better. Now, how long? It's very much up to you to decide how many words or how much information you want to communicate, keeping in mind for the other elements I talked throughout this video, the learnings, the metrics, and so on. However, the length of your answer is something for you to decide, right? The length and also the depth, if you want, of your answers as well, right? So this was on the length and depth. Number 8, ownership. Did you own the event, decision, project that you're talking about? Because what happens here is often, not very often, to be honest with you, but it does happen for people to talk about experiences they did not own. And this often happens in a bit to get up-leveled in a job interview, to look more senior than you actually are. And I found this a counterproductive approach. So I didn't hear about success using this approach for job interviews, right? So ownership, did you own that thing? And by the way, the way interviewers test you on this is through follow-up questions, follow-up and challenge types of questions. The follow-up and challenge questions will be something similar to these filters, right? Number 9, is the story or the example you're talking about a recent one? Is it still relevant, right? So for instance, if I'd ask you a time you had a conflict with a colleague, right? And if your work experience spans over the last 20 years, then giving me an example which happened 15 years ago is no longer that relevant for the purpose of job interview. Therefore, your answer wouldn't score as well. Okay, so you'd want to focus on more relevant types of experience, or if it's not, if it's not that recent but it's still relevant, then maybe don't mention when it happened, because it's not key to to improving the quality of your answers. But long story short, recent examples will do better on the condition, of course, your stories are strong, are still actual good stories. And number 10 here I'd like to talk about here, and actually one of the most important ones of all if you want to prepare for an interview professionally. Does your story qualify for a specific behavior? Such as dealing with ambiguity, decision-making, interpersonal skills, and so on. Because what happens here in a job interview, the best stories, the best answers are not necessarily the ones which answer the question you're getting asked, but the behavior that they're looking for, right? So any interviewer will have a goal. They don't ask you questions just because, they say, oh, let's ask him this, because I don't have anything else to do. But rather they would ask you this to screen you on specific behavior. Right, the time when you had a conflict with the manager, they screen your interpersonal skills. So if you talk about the time when there was a conflict with your manager, but that's your best story about interpersonal skills, and your manager was involved, that's still a far better answer than you would answer specifically about what happened during that conflict. So understand the context, why they ask you that specific question would significantly help you to give them exactly what they want to hear, and therefore, give them the best possible answer here. So these are my 10 tips, ideas, however you want to call them. I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.